So let's start. Just sorry, I will say a few sentences in Czech and then I will switch to English, yeah? Přátelé, díky, vítám vás na dalším webináři PR Klubu. Tentokrát je to na téma diverzita a další věci s tím spojené. A dovolte mi jménem výkonného výboru PR Klubu představit vám Sama Santiaga. My jsme se Samem seznámili, jak je to dlouho? Nějakých 12 let? 12 let, když já jsem pracoval v Citibank a měl jsem na starosti také agendu společenské odpovědnosti a se Samem jsme se seznámili nějaké, už nevím, co to bylo, konferenci v Praze, která se právě věnovala dobrovolnictví a podobně. Od té doby jsme v kontaktu a Sam se věnoval na pozicích typu viceprezident, ředitel právě tématu diverzita, právě tématu rovné příležitosti a podobně. A vlastně je jedním z mála lidí, kteří jsou opravdu certifikovanými experty na toto téma a takovéto strategie nastavují ve firmách, jako je Aerolinka, jako je obrovský řetězec prodávající oblečení a další spotřební věci. Máme před sebou zhruba hodinku a kousek. Věřím, že velmi příjemné a užitečné debaty. A já jsem Sama poprosil, když jsme připravovali tento webinář, aby to nebylo nějaké klasické povídání o tom, co je to diverzita. To všichni tady víme, ale aby to bylo z jeho pohledu, jak to má vypadat, a potom debata, která nás může všechny osvěžit a všem nám pomoct tom, k tomuto tématu a k těmto tématům přistupovat ještě lépe. A budeme to mít z první ruky. So Sam, I just repeated all the history from like 2010, since when we met here in Prague, and I described your roles in several companies like airlines, like retail store network, and I would like to give a vote to you and would like to hear your opinion for diversity strategies and how to set it up. And of course, this is about discussion, this meeting. So you have a great opportunity to ask Sam and we can talk among us. Thank you, Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pavel, and thank you for the invitation to join all of you today. I believe the one thing, and maybe we'll find out more, that we have in common is that we all speak English as a second language. So we'll take it easy. We'll try to use easy to understand terms. I think that particularly because Pavel and Alexander are here, it will be okay for you to make comments or enter comments in the chat, either in English or in Czech. If that's okay with you, that's okay with me as well. Maybe Pavel can help me understand a few of the discussions and serve a bit of an interpreter. But more importantly, this is about practical application of some of my experiences as a subject matter expert in diversity, equity, equality, and inclusion, and other related topics. I'm thrilled to be here. It's a great opportunity to have a very important conversation and to actually clarify a few terms and to ensure that we, again, have an opportunity to learn a few practical applications on some of those experiences that I've gone through, and maybe even some of you have gone through as well. This is actually not the first time that I have had an opportunity to talk to an audience of PR professionals. PR professionals continue to get engaged more and more and more in discussions about diversity. In fact, one of the ideas that I will be sharing with you, and hopefully we will have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that, is the role that you can play in ensuring that you have an active role in supporting, the development of diversity in the workplace. Alexandra, if you're ready to display the presentation deck, we're ready for that. And we can actually jump to the second slide already, as the title slide is one that we're all familiar with. The second slide, while Alexandra displays it, is really a little bit more about who I am, what I do. I will not be saying anything from this slide. You can read it yourself, and Pavel covered some of that. I'm going to try to say this word properly. Ahoy. Maybe
Correct.
I should. Okay, good. Maybe I should just stick to English or Spanish. So Spanish is my first language. English is my second language. So to tell you a little bit more about myself that is not here, and I think a part of the conversation that is very important when you talk about diversity, one of the things that I like to do is that I like to introduce myself, including in that introduction a few of the different identities that make me who I am. I think that that's a conversation that in many workplaces and in many cultures doesn't happen very often. Culturally, historically, because of a number of different traditions and what is considered to be acceptable, sometimes we don't have an opportunity to talk about who we are, right? Which makes it very, very difficult to understand this topic of diversity, because you're seeing me and what you're seeing is what you're judging. And it's not until you have an opportunity to get into conversations with others, maybe a little bit deeper beyond just the daily business that you do together. It's really when you're going to have an opportunity to understand diversity, or one of the ways that you can understand diversity. So to get us started and to start to create a space that is safe, where we can talk about whatever questions and provide any feedback and react in any way we want, to the conversation today, I'm going to get us started by saying thank you again for this invitation. I'm Samem Santiagem. I'm an openly gay cisgender male. I am Latino or Hispanic. That means that I am of Spanish descent, also with Afro-Caribbean influences in my family. I was born, raised, and educated in Puerto Rico, which was a colony of Spain for 400 years and has been a USA territory for the last 100 years. I speak Spanish as a first language. That's the language that I spoke most of my life, although I learned English since kindergarten. And then over the last 25 years, I have lived in Canada and in the USA. So for the most part, I've been forced to speak English every single day. Some days I speak it very well. Some days I'm not so sure that my English is very good. So either way, we give it a try every single day. You have very little choice when you live in the United States. So with that as part of my introduction, as you can see on the slide here, I have 30 years of experience in professional fields, as Pavel mentioned, and specifically over the last 20 years, I've been working very, very closely with a number of different organizations. One of the things that Pavel and I shared in common was working in the advancement of efforts to bring workplace giving, corporate foundation work, corporate philanthropy, and workplace volunteering to communities around the world. And that gave me an opportunity, since I started doing that at a very young age in my professional career, to start understanding diversity in general. What is it? And then, of course, because I've always worked in some sort of corporate environment, how that works or how that is applied in the workplace. So with that in mind, and as we continue to the next slide, I would like to pause for a moment. And even before I provide you with any definitions, I would like to give you maybe 30 seconds to think through, what do you think is workplace diversity? And you can either raise your hand if you'd like and make a comment that we can all hear, or you can type in the chat section. So what do you think is workplace diversity? How would you define it? Feel free to share your thoughts. You will not, this is not a test. You will not be scored. And if anybody would like to share publicly with the rest of the group, I would welcome that. Otherwise, I'll be doing all the talking, and that's boring. Any volunteers? All right, yes.
I don't know what does it mean. If it's diversity among people, or it's diversity among the working place, like working from the forest, working from the park, working from the office. So I don't know what does it mean.
Well, you know what? That's a very good point, and we can start with that. So why don't we take a look at the definition as we move on to the next slide, and we'll use that as a good launching pad for this conversation. Thank you for that comment. I think that's important to clarify. And if I do not acknowledge you by name, is because I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce your name. So, and anytime you make a comment, feel free to identify yourself by your first name. That way I can acknowledge you properly.
Okay,
all right, so
yeah.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
My name is Roman.
Roman, okay. Well, very nice meeting you. Thank you for your comment, and thank you for getting us started on this discussion. So, Alexander, if we move on to the next slide, there is, and the next one after that, there is a very high level definition and sort of a framework, right? So workplace diversity, number one, has become a business necessity because societies, because communities, because entire nations are changing. The people that are living in those countries are not necessarily the same people that were there 100 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago. Migration has changed, particularly in Europe, as it pertains to relationships with Middle Eastern countries and Northern African countries in particular. They have changed quite a bit. So understanding who is in the workplace, acknowledging, who is in the workplace, it is important. And that workplace diversity really refers to the fact that there are all kinds of individuals joining the workplace that are probably not the same individuals that most of us, most of you, are used to seeing in the workplace, right? So today, and probably over the last couple of decades, the demographics in the workplace, the genders that are working in different areas, maybe 20 years ago, technology, finance, and other disciplines in the workplace were mainly associated with males. Today, there may be more females participating in some of those jobs. Same thing with individuals of different races, ethnicities, and nationalities who have now become part of the society in your country and have just as much talent to get some of this work done. There's also diversity when it comes to sexual orientation and gender identity. There's diversity associated with educational background. Some people have vocational studies. Some people have only a high school diploma. Others may have graduate and postgraduate degrees. So there is educational diversity as well in the workplace. There's also diversity in the workplace based on abilities. Some individuals have physical disabilities. Others might have cognitive disabilities, meaning that the way that they move around the world is different, but it doesn't make them any less qualified or any less talented to be in the workplace and to succeed in the workplace. And when you see things, right, and this happens to all of us, when you see things that are different from you, then sometimes it's a bit of a challenge, right, to understand, is this person going to be capable of doing this work? Maybe media, right, newspapers, radio, social media, even, the politics of the country, even religion. There are many forces that over the decades, right, even over the centuries, have portrayed or have indicated that certain groups behave and perform in a certain way. And many times we need to be very careful because it may not be accurate how some of these individuals of different nationalities, of even different genders, right? How they perform in the workplace. It's something that if we are carefully looking around and providing these opportunities, equitable access to these opportunities in the workplace, we'll find out that they can do just as good work, just as anybody else in the company. So workplace diversity really refers to, this amazing number of individuals, particularly over the last few decades, that have been joining the workforce in many companies and many businesses around the country and all over the world that are not typically associated with that kind of work, or that are maybe recent migrants to the country. The question is, can they get the work done? And that's one of the things that we need to consider. And why do we want to consider that? Well, because understanding how diversity is so important for businesses, it's something that is going to help you make sure that you are successful. So as we move to the next slide, I would like to share with you research that has indicated what are some of the benefits of workplace diversity. So one of the benefits has to do with mutual respect among employees. The workplace is an environment where associates, employees, colleagues should be respecting each other, right? It's not necessarily a place for jokes. It's not a place for discrimination. It's not a place for prejudice. It's not a place where you bring your values, your beliefs, your principles, regardless of what they are, and you impose those onto others. It is important that we all understand that the workplace is a place, it's a location where we need to be focused on the work that needs to get done, and that will need to happen many times among people that don't know each other very well or maybe don't have similar backgrounds. The least that you can do is really take advantage of that as an opportunity to respect others. Workplace diversity also helps to reduce conflict and to perform conflict resolution. That means because people of diverse backgrounds have different perspectives, maybe a problem or a conflict in the workplace, it's not necessarily a problem or a conflict. Maybe it's just a matter of understanding there are different perspectives and understanding that there's not just one way of doing things. In some cases there might be, in other cases, it really is about, understanding those different perspectives and making sure that you're bringing in as many different diverse perspectives into those conversations to find resolution to challenges in the workplace. It is also important to have diversity in our businesses because it helps build a reputation as an organization or as a company that understands its customers, whether they are business customers, other companies, or customers that individual humans, right? Because people of different backgrounds, people who belong or identify as member of different diverse communities, they're all purchasing your products one way or another. So why not ensure that you have the ability to speak to them properly through your advertising, through your ad marketing, through your sales practices, and everything else that has to do with how you relate to some of those communities. It is also an opportunity to do job promotions and to do employee development that is equitable for all. So given that you have candidate A and you have candidate B and you have candidate C, are you looking at them as potential candidates and you're looking at them as the potential talent, right, that you want to hire because they have what it takes to get the work done? Or are you biased? Are you prejudiced because you think that because of the way that person looks, or maybe the religion that he or she practices, or maybe the languages that he or she speaks, or the country where they come from, is not one that you're familiar with and that you don't understand well, or that maybe you have some conflicts with. So it is important that as you take a look at the talent in your teams, then that you step back for a moment and you say, so am I bringing into this next opportunity the right talent because they are the ones that are really going to do it right? Or am I just trying to bring in the person that I feel most comfortable with because we share a lot in common? Therefore, I don't have to worry about understanding that person. And I think that's an important consideration. Companies that succeed are companies that are stepping back for a moment and hiring managers, recruiters, which I'm sure there are some in the audience. They're stepping back for a moment and thinking, okay, here's an opportunity for me to bring somebody completely different that have nothing in common with, but it truly is the best candidate for this job. And then last but not least, there's this opportunity to get exposure to different kinds of people, which again talks about diversity in thought, and then being able to develop competencies that will give you an opportunity to relate to individuals of those communities, in many cases, they're your customers, to relate to them in ways that are successful, that you have good relationships with them, which is always good for business because they will come back to you over and over and over again if they feel that they have been treated equitably. Pavel, I believe you have a question or a comment?
Yes. Sam, and do you have any specific examples how it can work in the company, for example?
So there are examples that are mainly related to the U.S. Are you thinking maybe any one of these specific benefits?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, if you can show us on real situations how it worked, what was the outcome, and like to move more from the theoretical approach to the practical showing of how it really can work and what are the benefits.
Excellent. So yes, very happy to provide an example. American Airlines, a little over 10 years ago, for those of you who are not familiar with American Airlines, it is today the largest airline in the world. It's based out of Fort Worth, Texas, which is just a few kilometers west from where I live, and a company where I had an opportunity to work for 25 years. They were doing an expansion to India, traveling now nonstop from Chicago to New Delhi, and of course, bringing people from all over the United States and other countries as well into New Delhi for the first time in the history of the company. The challenge they had was that they had never worked in that market before, and individuals that worked in addressing cultural issues and getting companies prepared to enter a new market were not as common back then as they are today. So the company thought, well, could we potentially turn to our employees, our Indian employees, to help us go through the process of understanding the culture, understanding the nuances of service on board planes, how check-in in both in the United States and India, would work, what kind of meals customers would prefer to have on board. And with that in mind, the company invited a group of well-known employees who were of Indian descent. Some of them have been born and raised in India, who were working for the company already. And an Indian employee resource group was formed, and the entire strategy to launch the service from the United States to India was based on the feedback that was received from employees that were intimately familiar with the cultural nuances of the Indian culture. So with that in mind, the food served on board, the language, the translations, the onboard videos, every single aspect of the service that was provided on that flight from the United States to India was put together thanks to the diversity that the company acknowledged existed, and the very intentional invitation to have these Indian employees participate in the process of creating the strategy for the launch of this new flight. The flight was wildly successful, and eventually, it did create and it opened a whole new market for this company.
Very nice. Maybe this is also a part of the success of Emirates, I guess, because they have, their stewards are really diverse, and they always have there something like 6 nationalities on the board.
Absolutely, and that is the key. The key to expanding markets, for example, is having people that understand the culture of that market. And it may be a market within the Czech Republic, it may be an international market. If you're trying to do something in another market, in another community, but the members of those markets or the members of those communities are not part of the conversation, then you're doing something wrong. You need to make sure that those voices are represented at the table of discussions, and that you make sure that you are getting the information directly from members of those communities. And that's why seeking out diverse employees to come work for your companies or to do business with you, diverse business associates, it's so important. Thank you, Pavel, for that question. Happy to take any more questions, but in the meantime, let's move on. One of the things that, as we move on to the next slide, that Pavel and Alexandra and I talked about, well, can you talk about some of your own experiences? How did you get to where you are today? And how do you feel so comfortable? And why do you think it is so important to do this kind of work? Well, my journey, I could talk to you about, all these different professional practices, but I wanted to share with you 3 very specific things that I've done over the years to ensure that I am where I need to be today and that I understand the importance of diversity. So as we move on to the next slide, and the next one after that. So the first thing that I have done very intentionally in my life is to try to live personal experiences with diverse communities through social and cultural activities. So that means I intentionally seek out to get involved in community work, for example, particularly going to maybe cultural performances. I have gone to other churches, and I have gone to other cultural centers and community centers for other communities to learn about them. So I have been to the Thai Center for people from Thailand. I have visited Jewish synagogues. I have visited Hindu temples. I have engaged in going to artistic presentations from different communities in different languages, because there's nothing better than to experience personally your relationship with those communities that are very different from you. So if you have not had an opportunity to do this before, if you find yourself that you're socializing with your same friends over and over and over again, one of the best ways for you to understand the importance of diversity is by making sure that from a personal perspective, you are engaging in experiences with these other communities. So, it's one of the things that I have found to be very, very useful, because there's nothing better for me in my particular case to say, oh yes, I know from personal experience that the Romanians, behave this way because I have been in the company of Romanians, right? Or that the Greek do this, or that the Palestinians do that, or the Tunisians, right? Because you have experienced their food, because you have experienced how they socialize, because you have experienced maybe how they go to church or, whatever faith they practice. And this is something that I have found invaluable. So as I talk about some of the things that I've done, I would like you to think about what are potentially some of the communities that you have wondered about and that you have never really taken any steps to get to know them and to get to socialize in them. And through the magic of social media, sometimes, and because of the pandemic, right, may not be able to do that in person, but there are, all kinds of different meetups and other activities that these communities put together. Join them. Absolutely, it's a great learning experience. Pavel?
Well, and do you see the difference between the US and, for example, Europe or Asian countries? Because from my perspective, there is a really big difference about companies, as you mentioned, because, for example, I worked for something what was US-based company. There was a very significant Indo-Pakistani influence, for a fully Russian company, for almost fully Polish company, for a local institution, and each of them had very strong specifics which were given by the origin of the company or institution.
Yeah, it is important to understand those differences, Pavel. You're absolutely right. And what makes you successful at being part of an organization is being able to bring in that perspective. So the culture of the company may be a more American style culture, it may be a more Polish style culture, it may be a more Russian style culture. But the reality is that culture in a company is also influenced, and it will change over time, by individuals like you who are intentionally trying to see things from a different perspective and are willing to bring that into the work that you do. So having conversations with the human resources team, for example, in understanding what kind of learning opportunities, what kind of training do we have available today, and could we, maybe explore the benefits of doing that for this company? Maybe because you're very involved in market development or business development, you're seeking out, and we'll be talking about that in a moment, you're seeking out information, you're gathering data about what's going on in your markets, and you're seeing the rise of, let's say, the Syrian community, right? Probably one of the biggest migrations that has taken place in Europe in recent years. Outside of any political issues, which is not what this conversation is about today, the reality is that there are growing Syrian populations in many European countries today. So is there a business growth opportunity by being specifically addressing the needs and the wants of the Syrian community? That doesn't happen by itself. It happens by having professionals like you who are intentionally looking at opportunities to understand the demographics and the culture of the markets that you're trying to do business with. And that's why these conversations are important, because you now have the ability to go back to your companies and say, hey, maybe we need to look into this. Let's take a look at the demographics. Let's expand beyond what we're familiar with, and let's see what business growth opportunities there might be by not being so focused on what we've always done, but to really open up, our vision to what is next, what communities, particularly what markets we could impact.
Great. Let's move on. Yeah.
Yes, as we move on to The next slide. Another thing that I've done on a personal basis, and in fact, this is how Pavel and I first met, was really getting involved with local communities, right? So you might socialize and you do things, on an individual basis, or maybe you develop friendships or whatever that is. But the reality is that you also have an opportunity to volunteer for special diversity projects in the workplace. Many companies have those community service programs working with NGOs who are serving diverse communities. So whether you have those programs in your company or not, volunteer opportunities abound, and I would highly recommend that you get involved with them. So let's imagine that and we know that they exist everywhere we go. There are NGOs that are serving diverse communities. Connect with them, give them a call, reach out to them via social media, whichever way they indicate that you can contact them, and explore the opportunity to participate in their volunteer programs. If there is a workplace or an employee volunteer program in your company, then explore working with those who coordinate those volunteer opportunities to explore, can we participate in working with more diverse communities? Because it's an excellent way to provide an insight into what these communities are, what is their culture, what are their needs, what are they wants. For a number of different reasons, particularly business reasons, there is an opportunity to connect on a more personal level here. Therefore, taking that intelligence, right, that intel back to your company and say, hey, there's a need here that nobody's fulfilling. Maybe we need to make sure that we take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
Pavel, do you have a comment?
Yeah. And do you have, again, any personal experience with this? I can imagine, for example, that in southern US states, in, for example, your retail stores, it can be a very important topic.
It can be a very important topic. Let me actually share with you a slightly different example. I also had the opportunity to work with the American Heart Association. And the American Heart Association is the preeminent, it's the largest health NGO dedicated to brain and heart vascular health. So heart attacks, strokes, and a number of other conditions. We did the research, they do, I'm no longer with them, but I was there for 6 years, and it's a research and programming organization. It's highly dependent on volunteers. And one of the things that we realized was that volunteers were not very diverse, that we were bringing in people that had the time and money to be a volunteer for the organization. And those individuals were mainly wealthy, white individuals who had generations of wealth and access to money and jobs and lived well enough that they could take time off from work or the company that they worked for to do work in these communities. So we intentionally changed that about 4 years ago by expanding our request for volunteers to other communities in the United States, African American community, the Black community, the Hispanic community, a number of different communities. Where was this important, and why was this important? Well, because those communities that we were working with that were seeing themselves in these volunteers were responding much better to participating in the programs when the volunteers looked like them, sounded like them, and in a way behaved like them, when those volunteers understood the culture or were part of the culture. So participation rates in the programs that we put out in different communities to increase heart and brain health went through the roof the moment volunteers who were more diverse and that looked like those communities and sounded like those communities started to show up. So that to us was a great example of how you can get engagement and how you can get communities to respond to what you have to offer to them. So maybe something that you need to sell to them, or maybe something that would help them, or maybe something that will bring growth and development, good development to those communities. But bringing in volunteers that were diverse and that really looked and sounded like these communities, it really created a tremendous growth in participation.
Okay, Sam, we have here just a recent question from one of participants, yeah?
I believe I saw something come through, so...
Yeah, I will read it for you. Hi, my name is Teresa, and I want to ask you, have you ever had a problem at workplace because of your sexuality, beliefs, etc.? I'm on wheelchair and girl and look young, and it was kind of hard to find a job or be respected in it. What helped you to overcome it? Sorry, I'm sick, so I can't speak.
Teresa, thank you for the question and thank you for sharing your identities. In the United States, there are organizations that advocate for the rights of workers with physical or cognitive disabilities. The success of these organizations has happened because they have helped their clients, right, those who are members of the persons with disabilities community, focus their work on organizations that already value, this kind of worker, or organizations that are open, mainly because maybe they're remote companies now. And it is a challenge, even for countries like the US, for individuals with disabilities to find gainful employment. So recommendations that are specific to the situation in the Czech Republic, there's probably an advocacy NGO. There's probably a workforce development organization. You might want to do the research locally. There are talent agencies, employment agencies that might also focus on trying to reach out to companies to provide people with disabilities access to employment opportunities. I would say that that's the first thing that you want to do, because trying to do this on your own, just like anything else that you might try to do on your own, it's something that will be a challenge if you're trying to do it that way. There is strength in numbers, there is power in large numbers of people promoting this kind of work. And I think that's an important first step. A second step, work with your network. You're here today in the company of other professionals that work in your area. Establish, more personal relationships and partnerships with them, and have one-on-one conversations with them, and let them know. And I said, this is what I do. This is my education. This is what I can do for your company. Do you think there's an opportunity for me here? Don't be shy, because I think that it is important that you stand up, for what you are, who you are. And then a word to those in this call today, let's support each other. So if you know of opportunities, maybe you want to reach out to Teresa and talk to her about, there is this opportunity in my company, or I know of a company that is looking for your skills and your knowledge. Let's talk about how we can help. That is the true value of these clubs and these networks. Good question, Teresa. Thank you for engaging in this conversation. As we move on to the next slide, then the last thing that I've done in my life is to address my own biases. So if you're not familiar with the word bias, it's really your brain is constantly judging things, right? Because you want to make sure, is this good for me? Is this not good for me? If you meet somebody new, you immediately judge them, because you're not going to be in the presence of somebody that you think is maybe dangerous to you. Or maybe you're driving a car and you're constantly making decisions. So there's some things that are already pre-programmed in your brain, and those things are those thoughts are called biases. They're kind of shortcuts, right, to making decisions. You have to make so many decisions each day that it's difficult if you have to start each and every decision from scratch. So because we all have prejudgment about things that we do or the people that we meet, or maybe even people that we work with, it is important that we pause for a moment. And if we find ourselves thinking, well, Pavel, I don't know what it is about him, but I don't know that he would be good for my team, right? And many times in English, we say something along the lines of, he's not a good fit. You cannot define exactly why, but you're thinking, oh, he's not a good fit. I don't think that he's going to work. Stop for a moment, pause for a moment. If you're trying to do business with another business associate, if you're trying to hire a new employee, if you're trying to promote a new employee, whatever you're trying to do with somebody who is from a community that you're not as familiar with, just pause for a moment and think about why you're feeling that way. What judgment you have against individuals that look like this person, or that sound like this person, or that dress like this person. There are many different things that we need to keep in mind. And those things that we're looking at, typically, if we're not careful with our prejudgment, it might rob us from the opportunity to bring in a great talent to work with us. Or maybe you're thinking about expanding your business and you're thinking, well, I don't want to work with, fill in the blank community or with this market because they're lazy, or, they're always asking for discounts, or they don't have money, or whatever that may be. Stop, right? Sometimes those reputations or those stereotypes about other people, they're not true. So you have to experience for yourself. And sometimes what you need to do is that you need to set aside your judgment and call out your own discrimination. So I'm asking you, because that's what's worked in my experience, to pause, think about why you're having reservations about doing business with this person or with this community or with this market, and then take action on it, right? Make your own decisions, based on your own judgment, not based on what you've seen on TV or on the papers or what somebody else told you 10 years ago. Create your own ideas of why it's important, or it makes sense for you to bring in diversity into the work that you do. I'm going to pause here for just a moment. We're very close to the end of our conversation. We have about 9 minutes left, I believe. No, we have 9 minutes left for this initial part, and we have a little bit. We have a little more time after that, right?
Yes, so Sam, actually, for the initial part was planned like 30 minutes, so we are a bit over. So if we could speed it up and focus it on specific questions, if we could.
Yeah. So I would like to then share with you 3 things, and that's my call to action. And we'll move on to questions and answers. So if we move on to the next slide, and then probably the next one after that. So my 3 favorite actions. So as I'm closing my conversation with you here today, there are 3 things I'm asking you to please consider. Number 1, inform yourself. You need to continue to learn and read about culture, society, and there's research about that. While this research was put together a few years ago, the truth is that culture doesn't change that quickly in many cases, and we probably still have some of the same issues from when this research was put together. This was the only one that I was able to find. However, there may be others that you're familiar with. So make sure that you do your research. This research in particular was very interesting to me. As we move on to the next slide, I would like to share with you a few highlights. Maybe you have your own highlights. Hopefully you had an opportunity to read it or at least glance over it. This is very specific to the 4 countries, right? So Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. It's focused on human resource, but there's management and education, but it touches on other disciplines like marketing. It defines diversity dimensions. It dives then deeper into gender, age, race, ethnicity, and so on by country. It does extensive comparison among countries, and then it provides case studies. So real life cases where a lot of this is put into practice. So if you have not had an opportunity to read that research, I encourage you to please do so. As we move on to the next call to action, use proper and common language. Many times we don't realize, although you are PR professionals, and probably you know this better than I do, that the words and images that we use are very powerful. So are you using images that are reflecting of diversity? So clearly define, understand, and use proper and common language is critical for progress. So just to give you a couple of examples, if we move on to the next slide, defining diversity, maybe it's something that you need to start working on. This is something that I'm sharing with you as a starting point. Maybe you do your own research and try to understand. This research document is really good at making and helping with some of those definitions. And the same thing with something that is even more critical, right? So once you understand what is diversity, then are you being an inclusive organization? Are you being an inclusive professional? So inclusion, as we move on to the next slide, it's another definition that is very important. And I helped you here by getting you started with a basic definition. Maybe you work off of this, to continue to help each other finding that common, proper language. That is incredibly important. Again, we all know the power of words. And then last but not least, the third call to action as we move on to the next slide, it's elevate the voices of diversity. So we know that data is king. It's supreme. So I'm asking you to please take a moment to support, promote, maybe author, broadcast, and maybe even fund research, case studies, and other data-driven resources that can help you and others in your profession and in other professions in the business world to really bring forth the importance of diversity, and by acknowledging diversity, becoming more inclusive professionals and being part of more inclusive companies. With that, I believe that we end this part of our discussion today. And I think that the next slide is really about just moving us on to any questions or comments that you might have. And Alexandra, I believe that there were some questions that were sent in advance. I don't know if you have those handy, readily.
Yes, let me check.
In the meantime, if I may ask you, you joined Ross Stores like not a whole year ago, or? Like
That's right, 7 months ago.
Like that, yeah.
7 months ago, yes.
What was your observation after you joined the company, and what did you change in that field of equality and diversity?
So one of the things that this company was already doing had to do with bringing in, particularly into the stores, a very diverse group of associates, employees that were representative of the communities where the store is located. And that is probably one of the most important things that you can do as a company. Because again, if you have products or services for sale that you're offering to whoever might be interested in them, then you have to make sure that you're looking very carefully into these different communities or markets, right? And say, if I have a phone to sell, then do I sell it to this community the same way I sell it to that other community? So that is a very important question to answer. We live in an era. Let me just finish this thought here real quick. We live in an era where there's a lot of individuality, and people want to express their individuality. It may not be the case in all the countries, but it's one of those things that people want to express their individuality. So in our particular case, as a fashion and home goods company, for us, it is important that we bring in items of clothing, right, fashion, and home furnishings and home items that are reflective of what the different communities find interesting. It may be print, it may be textures, it may be smells, it may be visuals. All of those things need to be taken into consideration, and that's one thing Ross has done well.
Ah, very nice. Because you know, I told you I'm a very happy customer of Ross. And
Yes.
Pavel Hermanský wants to give a question to Sam. Pavel, go on, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. I hope you can't see me.
Yes.
But at least you can hear me, so that's definitely more important. So first, a great presentation, Sam. Really liked it, and I would like to react on your, let's say, last part of the presentation or your speech, because I'm working on also communications and CSR and fields that are touched with D&I, and my experience here in the Czech Republic is that anything that comes, let's say, from the global in almost all corporates, and it's just translated without any big work of, let's say, tailoring to the local market and big explanation to the people. It's definitely not bought. Yeah, people don't buy it. People don't trust you. And I just wonder, are we so specific here in the Czech Republic, or is it your experience also in other markets and in other countries?
So my experience, well, first of all, thank you for your comment. My experience is more of a global experience, and definitely it's more from the Western perspective, right? More of the US, UK perspective on diversity. There are some basic concepts, and that's part of what I wanted to share with all of you today, that are basic to doing this kind of work, regardless of the country. But you need to adapt this to the local culture, right? So, for example, in the Czech Republic, there's a lot of sameness, right? There's a lot of likeness. It's not a country that is necessarily known for vast diversity, right? Or identifying, right, communities that would normally in the US or in the UK called minority communities. They exist, but they don't necessarily are acknowledged as such, right? They don't necessarily yet play a big role in market decisions and business growth decisions. So your comment is spot on, and that's why having these conversations amongst yourselves, and why I said that last call to action, you need to make sure that you're funding the research, that you're promoting the research, that you're making sure that any of these concepts that are coming mainly from outside of the country are adapted to the local culture, because they will not be bought into. They will not be adopted. So it needs to be adapted, and it needs to be customized. There's no doubt about it.
My good man, and how to explain this to headquarters? Because you know, from our perspective, it's very clear. But what I saw in several companies where I worked and mentioned, so there was almost no, when I say very politely, limited ability to accept such localization, and there was, you know, strong insisting on do it as we prepared it in headquarters, and it doesn't matter if if the headquarters or regional headquarters was in London or in Moscow. And both was
Yeah.
bullshit.
Yeah. And if companies are not, if the leaders of these programs are not understanding that it needs to be adapted to the local culture, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. There's no doubt about that. And I don't know that I have an answer to that, other than, again, that last comment and call to action: research data. That's the only way that all of this, any of this, will move forward. And that's how we've gotten here. The reality is that this has been a journey, a 30-year plus journey for the US, right? And in the beginning, particularly, it was all about complying with laws that indicated mainly that you couldn't discriminate against a Black employee or a candidate for a job. That's all there was to this work. There was nothing about other nationalities, race, or ethnicities. There was nothing about sexual orientation and gender identity. There was nothing about disabilities. All of that has been part of that journey over the last 30 years. And all of that has happened simply because leaders of those communities have moved forward to presenting the research that supports, the importance of doing that kind of work. I think that's why this study to me was very interesting. And while it's not a recent study, maybe it's where this group or different groups that are interested in doing this work take this from, right? Take it from there and say, what other research is there out there? And if there's none, then how do you plan, for research that will serve as the foundation for those discussions, for companies to make those decisions that they need to make?
Okay, clear.
I have found the questions from the guests. So may I read some?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. So first is companies often speaking about sustainability are time to time accused of greenwashing. Does exist something similar with diversity, or is there anything similar?
Yes, there is. So for those of you who are not familiar with greenwashing, that means that companies say, well, we care about the environment, but they're really not doing anything other than maybe a small recycling effort, right? And sustainability and being environmentally friendly requires more than that. So the same thing happens with diversity. We are committed to diversity, many companies say, but they don't do anything about it. They maybe change policy here and there. Maybe they put together events, very event-based work, but it's not sustainable. It's very short-term. Is not long-term, and they're not thinking about future impact or outcomes. So similar to what we were talking about, that Pavel were talking about here, some companies don't want to really go beyond saying, we believe in diversity, we have a program that we have put together, go do this, and they're not listening to their employees when they say, oh, we don't think that this is going to work here, let's do this differently. So they're committed to diversity when it works for them, but not necessarily in a way that creates the impact that is needed. Yeah, so it's the same challenge, absolutely the same challenge. Solutions, I always like to talk about solutions. The senior leadership or the executive leadership, they have to be committed to this. And in order for them to be committed to this, again, information, data, research. That's the only way that these individuals will be convinced. Because I think that most people understand that it's the right thing to do, it's the ethical thing to do. But if it's not translated into profits, right, then it's difficult for them to make some of those decisions. Why do I invest and put money into this when I'm not sure that this effort is going to bring me more money back in, right? And that's a good question. That's an important question. So that research is going to be absolutely key.
Thank you. So Nováková Lucie is writing, honestly speaking, sometimes it's also about comfort, easy to implement corporate ideas and not big effort to be done as the topics are not so relevant in our country. So that was just a reaction to what you just said. And I can move to the next question, which is, according to your international experience, where do you see some weaknesses and strengths in applying diversity for Czech Republic compared to the other countries? Rather EU than US, if you can compare.
Yes. One of the challenges that we see outside of the US or the UK have to do with the fact that many countries' demographics, right? The people that live in those countries and make up those countries, those demographics didn't start changing until about a few decades ago, right? So migration to former Soviet republics under a different regime was very limited. Those people that lived in those countries, their ability to learn about the outside world, their ability to travel and see other cultures and understand how things were done in other places in the world, that there are so many differences around the world. Those opportunities were very limited. So our ability to understand diversity, right? That the moment I see a person that dresses differently or that looks differently, whose skin tone is different, whose hair texture is different, that ability is very, very limited, because it really hasn't been until the last few decades that these countries have opened up, right, to this diversity. So that is a weakness, because to the degree that you are exposed to people that are different than you, that's how you're going to start to feel comfortable with them. You get to know them, you get to understand what they're all about. The strength is, Pavel, I think you have a comment.
I have, because I came to idea, and how can you really make that real switch in our minds to take this seriously? Because of course you can make some polishing and make-upping the internal culture that it is like no-go topic to comment on whatever, but you will still have some points of view, hidden comments, whatever. And do you have any recipe how to change that climate to make it like real, and not with using of bans and you know, for example, you know, speaking openly, like when you, for example, that Me Too topic, yeah. Mm-hmm. So it is something what then can be like misused if you want, and in today's world, when there is a high reach of social media, for example, you can, you know, destroy people immediately within hours.
Yes.
How and this, of course, this logic works also in companies, yeah, and this can form the other way of not functional internal environment, let's say. So how to make it like equal in terms of do this approach correct, but do not change it with some, let's say, violence on people.
Yeah, and so that's a good point, Pavel. I think that the most important thing to consider here is that there are forces that are bigger than any of us individually that will need to change in order for entire countries' cultures of diversity and inclusion to evolve to where they need to be. Politics play a big role in this. Religion plays a big role in this, and those are two very strong forces in many countries around the world. They even are here in the United States. There are religious organizations that get involved in politics. There are politicians who utilize, religious dogma, to justify discrimination. And as long as that exists in any country, and we see it here in the United States, it will be difficult for us to continue to acknowledge diversity and to be inclusive and respectful. I don't have to tell you this. All over the world, it's a known fact that the Black community has been under attack in the United States. That more recently, during the pandemic, that the Asian community living in the United States has been under attack. People have been killed. And that has to do with individuals that are trying to move forward an agenda of xenophobia and really discrimination against others for no reason other than the fact that they feel that by giving them access, by giving them opportunities and success, then they're going to miss out on something, that they're going to lose something. And as long as we feel like sharing the wealth, providing equitable access to others who don't look like us, who don't sound like us, is going to impact us negatively, then we're not going to be able to make any progress. That is the most fundamental perspective that we need to change.
Yeah.
By giving others access, power, authority, influence, it's not like I'm losing something. Everybody else wins. But that's not an easy thought.
Yeah, that's right. But for example, when you see, companies profiles, and there are local branches in diverse states, and for example, now there were those LGBT frames and stuff like this. But the company profiles, for example, for Middle Eastern countries, are not framed by LGBT flag. So then it also does not look authentic, because when the company really thinks these topics should be supported and this is the natural part of the internal culture, so it should be worldwide and not limited by, let's say, political and client perspectives, and which means revenues in specific countries. What do you think about this? You are muted.
My apologies. There was a little background noise. So yes, there are so companies that are socially responsible, right? Corporate social responsibility are companies that consider the importance of revenue, right, and profits, but also consider the importance of ethics and doing what is right by people, regardless of what those people look like, sound like, dress like, who they love, whether they have physical or cognitive abilities that they're familiar with, right? And that's one of the biggest challenges too. Not in that journey of evolving into corporate, into socially responsible companies. A lot of companies are not quite there yet. So the challenge here is helping the company leadership understand that doing the right thing because there's money to be made is important, because if there's no money, there's no company. But also helping the company leadership understand it's the right thing to do for people, because companies are made up of people. And if people are not able to join this company because we're discriminating against them, because we feel that because of how they sound, they look, or they behave, they're not the right fit for this company, then we're missing out on the opportunity to grow, right? And so that is the balance that we need to find. And those are the conversations that people like you and others need to start formulating and having with the executive leadership. These are very, very difficult conversations, and not all of the leaders are going to understand them, but they're necessary to be had. I did that, 20 years ago. I sat down with a senior VP in my company, And we had a conversation about, a particular community that he had questions about. And he said, okay, well, if you have questions, let's talk about this. And I'm going to share with you some things that maybe you didn't hear before, some things that you might or might not like. But let's do this. And if you really mean it, then we're going to make change. And indeed, it happened. But it takes a lot of work.
And
it worked out.
Yeah.
It worked out. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
So we have still one last question. I think that partially it was already answered by you, so maybe only if you have something to add, and that is how to foster diversity without pressure. What does mean diverse workplace in your point of view? So I think that you said what it means for you, so maybe something about not pressuring diversity when applying.
I think that that's a good question, because nobody likes to do things because they're being pressured to do them, right? It's like that we all agree that being pressured to do anything doesn't work. It's not sustainable. It's not going to work well long term. So what I've done, and what a lot of people I know have done, is that they have put themselves in a position where they're constantly talking about their own identity, right? So, for example, one of the things that I talk about very often in the workplace is that I was born and raised in a Spanish culture. I speak Spanish as a first language, English as a second language. And what that creates is an opportunity for people to see me from a different perspective and say, oh, well, and how is that different, right? And then I have an opportunity to talk about that in detail and educate them. I was having a conversation actually with a dear friend that I've known for a long time. We were having coffee a few Saturdays ago. And I said something that I know that I mispronounced. I didn't say it in the typical American way. And she looked at me with a smile on her face, and I know she loves me. But she looked at me and she said, oh, you talk funny sometimes. And I'm like, yeah, I talk funny because I speak more than one language. So if you're trying to speak more than one language, you're not always going to get the pronunciation of all the other languages you speak right. But you understood what I said, right? And she's like, yeah. I just thought that the way you said it was funny. I said, okay, well, good thing that I can say that in 4 different languages, right? Yeah. So you don't have to be on the defensive, but you have to defend the importance of being different. Does that make sense? Right? You don't always have to be lecturing people and pressuring them to understand that diversity is important and inclusion is important. But maybe using yourself as an example, or people that you know as an example, then you bring the humanity into all of this, and you do it in a light way. You don't have to have arguments about it. You don't have to have heated discussions about it. It's just, maybe take it lightly and say, like I said, I talk funny because I speak more than one language. And they say what they say about people that speak more than one language. They're very intelligent. And so we made it light, and we laughed about it, and it was funny. And I think that's an important part of this process. Nobody likes to be pressured. Again, we know that. Maybe you bring it down to a more personal level, and you use yourself as a tool for change.
Well, this may be very human, touchy.
Yes.
Point. Thank you for this. Maybe Sam, if you will have some case study or some idea, you can share with us, and we will be more than happy to share this on our social media profiles or a newsletter for our members and fans. Thank you for this, for the question, guys. Don't you have anyone any question to Sam today? Because we have here almost 6:30 today, and the weather is great. So I'm pretty sure that a lot of us will go out to enjoy some glass of beer or wine or whatever, because after half of a year lockdown, we had like 6 months or more lockdown here, and very terrible cold weather. It changed rapidly, so we will enjoy this. Thank you very much, Sam. You have now something like almost noon, I guess, so you will go to enjoy your lunch, or?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. It's been my pleasure to share my knowledge and experience with you. I would recommend that you go back to that research. It's from a few years ago. Maybe as a group, you follow up with the researchers. I think that was very well done. It's really good information there. It might be from a few years ago. Maybe there's something that is more recent. Yes. So I think that would be a good follow-up point for this group in trying to promote and support diversity and inclusion in the Czech Republic.
Okay, thank you,
Thank
Sam.
you for your time.
Bye bye, enjoy. Přátelé, mějte se pěkně, užijte si ten hezký večer a mějte se krásně, díky.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
What Pavel
bye.
said. Be
Bye.
well.